Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our conversations on the impacts of COVID in 2020. My name is Kate Charters, and I'm the chair of SEGRA, which is the acronym from Sustainable Economic Growth for Regional Australia. And we're delighted to be hosting this series of conversations about the impacts of COVID-19 on regional Australia. I'd like to particularly welcome our two guest speakers for today, Councillor Bob Manning, Mayor of Cairns Regional Council, and Mark Olsen, who's the CEO of Tourism Tropical North Queensland. Thank you both very much for joining us. And we've in fact been fully subscribed, if not oversubscribed, to this teleconference. So it's obviously a very timely topic, and we're delighted to have people of your calibre and expertise in tourism to be speaking in our panel discussion today. Because of the large numbers of people involved and the format, we're unable to have people ask questions directly of our panellists, but we do have a chat box down on the bottom of your screen. And if you could put questions or comments into that chat box, we'll do our best to get to them during the session. And also we will we'll also look at those when we're shaping up our communique that we'll issue at the end of this session. So if you could use the chat box or the Q&A box, that would be great. Well, as this pandemic continues to dominate the world, and Australian states and state and territory governments act to address the unfolding situation, SEGRA wanted to provide a forum where people who live, work and invest in regional Australia could advance their issues and the issue impacting on their regional, rural or remote area. The idea of the webinar is to assist in bringing together key issues and opportunities while hearing firsthand from people tackling the impacts of COVID-19 in regional Australia. These impacts will be across health, the broader economy, education, business, lifestyle, and well-being, just to name a few. Robert has been collating the key issues that have been emerging during each of our webinars, and people might like to go to our website, which is referred to in the chat box, where a copy of this diagram can be found. But Robert, please talk us through where we've got to date.
Rightio, Kate. I'll quickly bring up the screen. Okay. Yes, here we are. Well, yep, on the 20th of March, we started this conversation about trying to get an understanding of what post-pandemic regional Australia will look like. What will regional Australia 2.0 be? Because everyone's saying it will be different. And we were taking off the Prime Minister's metaphor of the bridge, the transition, and we were thinking, well, regional Australia, what will be our best eyes to build the regional bridge for our communities to transition into a strong and vibrant regional Australia 2.0. So through the number of sessions we've had, we've been collating sort of key action areas that have come out of each discussion. And fairly early on, there was a sense that we're going to be high impact hard infrastructure ideas, but also high impact soft infrastructure ideas. So there's that balance of between people and infrastructure in the solution. So what we've been doing is building this sort of key issues chart from left to right as we've gone through these sessions, because we just last week completed conversation number 11 on collaboration. And as we've done those and we've issued the communique at the end, I've pulled out a couple of the key sort of action areas that were discussed, and we've been populating it through those various topics. So as you again look across that now, it's getting to be quite an interesting cluster of action areas that'll need to feed into our idea thinking at the other end of that if we're going to come up with our best ideas. Just to say what came out of collaboration session, which was a great case study. The two key things I pulled out of that was to provide deep listening. We talked about that a lot, and create a trusting dynamic. More than anything, moving forward is to get the best ideas, we need to listen to the stakeholders, we've got to build trust and obviously find ways of delivering that. But that's at the moment where the chart sits, Kate, and I'll switch it back to you.
Thanks, thanks very much, Robert. The other thing that I really got out of last week's webinar was that you must be looking for win-win situations. And I thought that was a very important point that they made, and the need not to look for a compromise, but to actually look for a win-win. So I thought that was an interesting point as well. And as Robert says, we put out a communique at the end of each webinar, but keep your eyes open, because later in the week we'll be sending out a special communique as part of the Speaking Up for Regional Australia series, so keep your eye open for that. Well, listen, Bob, if I can turn to you now. Firstly, thank you very much for your time, and if I could get you to give a brief overview of your background, which I know is extensive in this area, and then tell us a bit about the situation of COVID-19 in Cairns. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks very much, Kate, and pleasure to be with you this morning. And it's always a pleasure to speak with anyone about regional Australia, because there really is a lot of catch-up to be done in parts of regional Australia. Kate, look, I'm a Cairns boy, born and bred, schooled here, spent 3 years in the army as a national serviceman. So they didn't ask me to go, they told me to go. Business studies degree from University of Southern Queensland. Time spent working in Cairns, in Townsville, in Longreach, in Cyprus, and now back in Cairns, and fortunate enough to be elected as the mayor eight years ago, and now have another 4-year term to see out, and I think that's where we put the full stop. Kate, this is like nothing else before, and that's, of course, is an understatement, a stupid understatement, but you think you've seen it all, and you think you've seen things that nobody else could conquer, but you managed to get through it. This one is so different, and to think that we have this great big level playing field now called Earth, and we're all in the same boat. And I take a lot of heart out of that, because those of us who get to the blocks and we really burst out of there, we should be in front of a lot of others. And I think that's just, it's incumbent upon us all to get ourselves, set and ready to go, and be prepared to go as soon as the opportunity presents. I think there's for us, for Cairns, we are a wonderful destination. We are a true international destination. We're a destination, though, that represents the best of the tropics, Great Barrier Reef, wet tropics, truly global, truly recognised globally. But we're in this great big country, Australia, and we sit a couple of thousand kilometres north of the nearest capital city, and travel and getting around the country is always an issue. I think one of the big issues we face at the moment is, apart from a whole lot of recovery items that we're engaged in, though, is aviation. We will rise or fall on aviation. Like no other city in Australia, Cairns is driven by aviation. Our ratio of passenger movements to population is about 30 to 1. It used to be up about 32, 33, but it's about 30 to 1, whereas the same ratio for Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne would be 6, 7, 8, 9, no more than that. So a place that really depends heavily on aviation to both feed and move people into and out of the area. So,
excuse me, Bob, I'm wondering if you could describe just the sort of impact and what's happened in Cairns, because a lot of us who aren't there realise you've relied on aviation a lot, but what's it like? What's really happened on the street and with business?
Rob, the streets are bare. Parking lots, we're giving them away at the moment. We'll give you money to put into the meter. But the streets are bare. There is I mean, I go from the office to home, from home back to the office. We don't go out anywhere. We walk down the street and wave to a few people, but hotels are closed, or retailers closed. A few eateries that are doing deliveries, or you can buy a takeaway. So I've never seen the city like this before. Boats tied up in the harbour everywhere. There is just no commerciality about it at all, Rob. And then tourists, there are none. I mean, fewer caravan parks, but we're just devoid at the moment.
I'm wondering if I'd flip to Mark on your how you describe the current situation. What's changed so dramatically and the impacts that are there at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. The really noticeable thing is we've gone from around 55,000 visitors every day on the streets to under 1,000. We've gone from an average occupancy around 80% or higher at this time of the year, particularly around Easter, to single-digit figures. And as Bob said, that's medical workers, people who are in quarantine, and the people who are long-term residents here who have holiday houses. So we're really down to the absolute bare bones of visitor numbers. In the first 3 weeks, we saw a loss of about $200 million of visitor expenditure. By the time the full lockdown had occurred, we're hitting more like $500 million of lost visitor expenditure in the first 3 months, and 95% of businesses are in hibernation. Now, we were the first in. We started this journey 15 weeks ago as China went down into lockdown, and 42% of Queensland's visitors to China come through here, just like 1 in 10 visitors to all of Australia internationally come through the region. The impact is dramatic. The opportunity is enormous, and as Bob said, it would be very much driven by the aviation connectivity. More than half, 54% of all visitors come through the airport, and a third of all visitors to the region are international. So we've got a long way to come before we're back to anything like normal.
Yeah. You've said 15 weeks, which is mind-boggling. How is business coping with that?
I don't know, Rob. I really don't. I mean, people are just holding things together as best they can. I mean, it's remarkable. You go to a 5-star restaurant, you're doing deliveries in a little van, taking meals to people's places. I mean, you do whatever you can to keep going, stay above water.
One of the points that you made, which I think has come out in a couple of our other webinars, is that people have got to be obviously marketing heavily at the moment and using this downtime to look for other opportunities. But what sorts? But the point you made was that people had to be ready to hit the accelerator the minute the opportunity arose. How are you communicating with your businesses about what they might be doing now and what they might be doing in the future, and what sorts of things have come up in those conversations?
Kate, from the city point of view, we are working hard, or just the same as we would normally be working, and we're taking the opportunity to freshen up and brighten up the infrastructure within the city, and the place really does look a picture. But as far as business people are concerned, perhaps Mark would be better to comment on that. Again, it's just keep your head above water.
Yeah, certainly. Week one was all about providing a safety net for our operators, trying to find cost reduction opportunities, as well as business support tools that they could use to really survive this. So it's a very long hibernation period. For many operators who are heavily reliant on the international market, they won't see a customer this year. We don't expect to see international visitors return in 2020, possibly not until 2021. So, and that could be the second quarter. So for a number of businesses, it'll be a very extended hibernation. Payroll offsets, land tax offsets, the JobKeeper, all of those have been really key in supporting business. but we know that there will be a much longer period ahead. There's still a big question mark over events. What does an event look like in a world of social distancing? What does the aviation landscape look like? Who will purchase Virgin? So it's a big challenge ahead.
Just one technical comment, Mark. I wonder when you're talking, could Bob mute his mic? Because I think you're in both in the same room, and
We are.
It's echoing. So it was a bit hard for people to hear you when you're talking then.
Yeah,
but
we'll alternate the mutes.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. So if we look at your international impact has been incredible and devastating for a lot of the industry. Do you see, we've got a question here from Tony, is there an opportunity to significantly ramp the development of the Australian drive touring routes that have local authorities and regional tourism bodies working cooperatively to create more themed routes in an effort to get Australians travelling domestically? Is that come into your vision yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started back in October on the Drive North Queensland partnership, and we brought the regions all the way down to Mackay and through the outback together into a single cooperative marketing campaign under the banner of Drive North Queensland. We've already launched television commercials locally, giving people inspiration and new itineraries. And in the next few weeks, as the travel restrictions begin to ease, we'll extend that marketing campaign even further onto the television screens and into the lounge room. So Drive is the most obvious return. I do wish we had 4 million people on our doorstep, as some destinations do. We don't have quite the same volume, so I think a comment was made before about diversifying the visitor base. We've probably got one of Australia's most diverse visitor ranges. We attract visitors from over 100 countries in any given year, every state and territory in quite significant volumes. And while there is a seasonal shift here, we have year-round visitation from across the globe. The challenge is when the world is all shut down at once, then every business is impacted.
So do you think you will have different marketing strategies, and how new are those marketing strategies, or how relevant are the existing ones? You said that you've already been marketing since October a drive-by scenario, but have your businesses had to adapt, and how have they had to adapt?
Yeah, absolutely. Every business has to rethink its fundamentals, particularly those that have been heavily reliant on the international market. As Bob said, that started with the obvious one: how do we get into delivering takeaway? Moving now into how do we service a market that's only driving 50 kilometres? And in the years ahead, everyone's going to have to rethink their business. Everything from how a hot air balloon provides a COVID-safe experience, through to businesses that have been heavily reliant on international, pivoting to the domestic market. So much of our work over the last 15 weeks has been working with businesses individually on helping them retool, reset the agenda for their staff, relook at their sales and marketing platforms, and in many cases, completely rethink the turnover and operating model that they can work with over the next 5 years.
So you think it'll be 5 years before things will have adjusted again?
Absolutely. So we would say it's at least a 5-year horizon. If we work on the experience of, say, the region's recovery from the GFC as even an early indicator, it's at least a 5-year recovery. That's with accelerated investment in marketing and aviation. Without an accelerated investment in marketing and aviation, that could extend beyond 7 years. So the forecast for the region is a tough one, and it will still depend on how the global economy recovers, particularly our international source markets. It's not just a matter of travel ban, it is the ripple effect of global economic slowdown in some of our key target audiences for Australia, as well as Australian families and the disposable income they have to invest in travel. The early signs from March, when we did our first surveys of the domestic market, showed that most people were only really thinking about travelling within 400 kilometres once the travel bans are lifted. So for us, that significantly reduces our target audience.
Do you think this scale of impact will mean you need to diversify employment or business just by default as this time pans out? What do you think is going to happen in that space?
Rob, we're nothing like this has happened before, but we're aware of. I'd like to think that there is a new dynamic in the world now. I mean, there are so many of us. We are so much more technically advanced, and we're more innovative in the way we think. And I'd like to think that this might roll out a little bit quicker than what Mark expects. I'd like to think that we're going to be able to drive this and drive it harder. I'm sure that there will be a cooperation like never before. We all know our economies depend upon this, and economic prosperity equals quality of life. So I'm a believer that we will come out of this maybe a little bit faster than what we expect.
Bob, following on from that, you were mentioning previously, I was speaking to you about ideas in aviation and different routes that might come out, and maybe our neighbours being a source. Do you want to sort of talk about your thoughts in that space?
Rob, there's no spectacular brain power here at all, but I had a fair bit to do with aviation in part during some periods of my life, and what I do know is that planes point their nose where people want to go, and airlines continue to fly where they make a profit. And it's that the second part of that's the important one here. We need a system of aviation for Australia. I mean, Qantas is there, and I think they're our long-term carrier. They will operate at the top end of the market, but the ability to bring a second player in, whether that's Virgin or whatever name it has, but the ability to bring in a second player to come in where the model addresses what the requirements in the marketplace are, and that will be moving people around regional areas, low cost, frequency, regional Australia, and particularly places like Cairns and Darwin and Alice Springs, and they will depend upon that. That will be our future. It may well be that we could be having more inbound traffic if all traffic entering Australia, international traffic, heaven forbid, entering Australia entered through Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. It could be that delivers more tourists to us than direct flights would, where the number of direct flights we will get will always be limited by our size. So I think we need to look at that. We need to look at all the options. We need to get the value. I mean, it's the value that we've got to get out of this to give us certainty for the future.
We've got just a comment here that I think fits with some of the conversation we've been having. Unfortunately, it's full of acronyms that I don't understand, but you might understand them. The Chinese self-drive FIT and small tour group, IMHO, offers a great way to minimise the lingering impact of COVID-19. Cairns offers fantastic self-drive geo tours through the Atherton Tableland and even into the Etheridge Georgia, what's the capital of the main town in Etheridge? Georgetown, Etheridge and Georgetown, e.g. Undara. The Chinese market is primed to be attracted to quality, holistic, nature-based tourism. So you might want to comment on that, but I think it's a comment more than a question. Would you like to say anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like Angus Robinson to me, a great advocate of geotourism. Look, there's no doubt about it. The diversification of the markets and moving into the niches is going to be a key part of the recovery. Destinations will need to speak directly to the new tribes that emerge out of the other side of COVID-19. So people who have an absolute passion for a very particular topic will be the first audiences willing to travel, because their passion will get them
to overcome the challenges of the uncertainty of travel. A question popped up before about cruise shipping. We're absolutely welcoming of visitors from all across the world when that's possible. What we know and what we're doing right now is working really hard with the tourism industry to make sure that the staff and the customers stay COVID safe. What does that look like? How do we get people around? But Angus is absolutely right, and many people have identified that small group touring will definitely dominate because people will want that little bit of escape, that little bit of extra distance. If we remember the impacts of September 11, there was a huge pendulum swing towards security. No laptops on planes, no water bottles. You couldn't take anything metal. We will have an overreaction swing from COVID-19 in the first stage, and that could have a significant impact on things like business events and major events. And it'll be our responsibilities in industry to demonstrate to the customer and to the insurers and to all those who sit around that we can provide COVID-safe experiences. So much of our work in the last 2 weeks has been about working with businesses into that transformation. How do you provide confidence and certainty? And how do we meet the legal requirements that will pop up over the next 6 months? And a point building on from Bob's comments before about diversifying the economy, tourism is working really closely at the moment in strengthening our links with education, our links with the innovation sector, and our links with agriculture to go beyond lip service of, yes, we serve local food, to really building deep connections between the agricultural sector and the tourism sector. So one of our first campaigns is actually really strongly working with supporting the ag community. We started that with workforce sharing, and we're now moving into the next phase of really highlighting quality food stories locally for no other reason but to demonstrate what amazing produce is in the region for no tourism benefit in the first instance. So moving beyond our tourism sales into real partnerships with the other sectors.
Thanks. I've just got another question here, which links back to a couple of things for me. The first question is, how is agriculture coping with access to workers? And the other, can you mute your microphones? I'm getting a feedback. How is agriculture coping with access to workers? But I guess that brings me to a more general topic of where the impact is being felt most, because I'm really conscious that a lot of people who are in your industries are the services and hospitality are young casual workers. How's that shaping up for you?
I'll kick off that conversation. Certainly the first impact we saw from the farming community was concern about getting the crops off. That was quickly followed by equal concern about spreading coronavirus into the families who live in those communities. So step one had to be using local workforce, and we really effectively did that through the FNQ Jobs Network. A great community of local support agencies came together to match those who have been stood down to be able to access some of that work. But there are no doubt there have been huge gaps. No one expected this to be on the same scale that it's been on. Overseas skilled migration, overseas skilled workers have found chasms that they have fallen into in terms of government support and the ability to access work, and that continues to be an issue. International students have been left basically sitting at the bus stop, waiting to find out what they're supposed to do. In many cases, have been informed, jump on a plane and go home. Which plane to what home, to what conditions, how is that practical? So there's been gulfs that have opened up in terms of the workers. The agricultural community at this stage are quite comfortable with the level of workforce that they've been able to access. The crops are coming off. People have not been buying key items. So avos are still selling well up here. We're one of the biggest avocado producers. But no one's buying limes. I think it must be the lack of Corona sales. Too many people are afraid of coronavirus. They're not buying beers that put lime in them. So the limes are sitting here in bulk. There's a number of other products. But we have started to see fresh seafood moving out through the ports, as Bob said, down to the gateway ports and out to market. So it is starting to move, and there's some really positive signs for agriculture. But for us, this is an opportunity to press the reset button and put a highlight on not only our primary production, but our value-added. There's some amazing value-added products here that we really want to showcase. And there's been some great talent that have really jumped out to showcase their wares online through this crisis.
We had a discussion earlier on about the fact that in the industry there'll be some businesses, about 16%, who are early adopters, and then there'll be the 80% who are slow, and then the 16% who are the laggards. Are you seeing anything coming out of your early adopters at this point? Like you've talked about meal deliveries and things like that, but have any been able to come up with new ideas at this point?
Look, I think there's people in this region always have been, explorers. They're prepared to get out the front and lead the way. I see that's something I see in the people up here quite a bit. They don't shy away from things. They are door kickers, and I think that the region, the people, the wives, the children, the systems that are here, things are working really well. I mean, I find it hard to believe we've been in this state now for so long, and I didn't realise so much time had flown by. But I think people work hard. We're keen to get the door opened up and have another crack at it, and I think that for us will be the real test. That if we go out there, hell bent on being leaders, we're prepared to take some control of that, or try to, then that will stand us in much better stead. But I would have a high expectation that that's where we would be.
And can you tell us a bit about the communication strategies you have with business and with your communities?
Well, Kate, it's a lot more complicated than it used to be.
Yes.
Going through platforms like this, and we've become quite adept, I think, at being able to communicate. My car is getting up less miles than ever before. It goes to and from work, or if I stay home for the day to work, it doesn't move at all. So Kate, we all want this to be over, and tomorrow, if possible. We don't want it to go on for one day longer than it has to, because it is a little bit of hell trying to adapt to something that's completely unnatural, to be going in effect almost backwards instead of forwards. But we know that day's there. We know that's coming, and I'm sure it is. And I think for us, the great test will be, and show of our character will be, just how we come out of that. And I think with a great deal of enthusiasm, I hope, and hell bent on being, up somewhere up the front.
I've got a question.
Just to add to that, I think Bob might have kind of missed a few things that I think have been really important about the communications. Firstly, we took a disaster management approach from the very first day. So 7 weeks ago, we formed a subcommittee of the local and district disaster management group for economic recovery and human and social services. Bob sits on a local leadership committee, himself as mayor, with a state member and federal member, Warren Edge. So there's really one voice to the community, using the media really effectively, clear, succinct, very straightforward messages in everyday terms. Helpline was set up immediately for businesses and locals. Thousands of calls came through that help centre for people to be able to ask sometimes the most obvious questions, sometimes really complicated questions. And then the three main business entities here, TTNQ from the tourism perspective, the Chamber of Commerce and Advanced Cairns, who are all members of the Economic Development Committee, also have direct communication through regular webinars every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. And twice weekly video uploads to let people know just what's changing. And at sometimes every day there was a new announcement, sometimes more than one. There was a lot to take in. We developed a lot of video content for people to be able to understand how those changes have occurred, and just like this, lots of Q&A sessions so people could spend some time to unpack the big issues and really understand what is available to them. We provided HR support to every business in the community. so that they could make the transition, particularly as we were moving into early stage JobKeeper. But I think the fundamental has been one clear, strong voice from the Mayor, Michael Healy, State Member, and Warren Ench at a federal level. So there's been absolute unity in the voice to the community and to the federal and state government on what was needed to help our businesses to transition.
That's great. And I've heard a few regions now enacting a disaster recovery type group, and it sounds from what you're saying as though yours has been very successful. So congratulations on that. I think getting the right information to the right people at the right time is one of the most difficult things to do during a crisis, and so to have a mechanism for that's terrific. I interrupted you, Robert. You were about to ask a question.
Yeah, and just to follow on, probably I'll throw to Mark first, because what we're finding in our conversations that COVID has sort of exposed the underbelly of regional Australia and some of the weaknesses there. And I'm wondering, from your position and where you've come into the job and now COVID's come along, has COVID actually exposed anything surprising, or is it just amplifying the underlying weaknesses and issues we have to address as far as, you know, the impact of it? Is there anything surprising that COVID's exposed from your position?
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably amplify is the right word, Robert. When I came into the role, one of the first things that was obvious was our reliance on a very particular segment of the international market, being the group series. And with 1/3 of all visitors being international, 1 in 10 visitors to Australia comes to our region. While we have a really diverse base, that group series market was one of the first impacted, particularly the China group series. Now, China only represents 7% of our total international market and only 2% of all visitors to the region. But the time that they came, so in terms of our seasonality graph, late January was always a quiet time in the domestic market. Australians are taking their kids back to school. Most other international markets are not travelling, and it's the peak travel time for China. So in most cases, you would think that's the perfect diversification strategy. You pick up a market who fills your biggest gap, but we only had one primary market, and that is the Chinese New Year, both domestic and international traveller. I think there was a point made before about domestic FIT. One of the gaps for us was the domestic market had been underserved, and our pathways and our channels into market and our strategic partnerships were not as strong as they should be. And the other one that is really obvious, so free and independent travellers being FIT, those who make their own bookings rather than going through the agency or the online travel agency. So that was the first really obvious one. The other one was the weakness of our link with the other sectors. So we have a relationship with education within a very narrow band, international study tours, had a relationship with agriculture, but really at a very superficial level. And the innovation economy that sits here in the region, as Bob said, tourism's always been a leader in innovation, but there really wasn't a strong infrastructure supporting the innovation economy. And I think that remains one of our challenges over the next months and years, is to really harness the power of good local ideas. Some amazing ideas came up, many of them very successfully implemented. Many businesses have switched to online delivery, parcel direct, takeaway food, all amazing ideas, but we haven't yet harnessed the power of that innovation economy here locally. And I think we've been very busy in other parts of the economy. That's probably one of the spaces that's been left behind.
That's interesting, because one of the things that we've been reflecting on is access to the digital economy, and that people are using this time to tidy up websites, look at their online presence. I'm aware from SEGRA's presentations that we've had the people who are building digital marketing, but also the capacity to use digital mechanisms for interpretive materials. Is that an opportunity for Cairns going forward? Do you have much of that digital self-drive tourism?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got digital platforms right across the economy, digital transaction, online sales, visitor experiences, the whole interface. But I think what it's done is it's supercharged or turbocharged people's comfort level with technology. And I think where there might have been a little barrier to entry for some sectors, some sectors of the economy were very traditional. I think with the massive increase in downloading of apps and the use of technology like this one, really has sped up that take-up. I think it's brought it forward by at least 2 to 3 years in terms of take-up. We'd always talked about the opportunity for augmented and virtual reality to enhance a visitor experience, whether it be in retail sales or in tourism. We'd always talked about digital networking. We're an area twice the size of Victoria, if you include the blue as well as the green landscape. So it's a massive land area that we look after. So my region stretches from Cardwell to the NT border and up into the Torres Strait, just 4 kilometres from Papua New Guinea's coastline. So it's a massive land area, and we've always talked about the importance of building personal relationships. I think the technology has really elevated just how quickly those relationships can be built remotely. And it puts a question mark over the future of business events. What will they be like in a year's time? How many business events and conferences like the SEGRA conference will be augmented by these sorts of environments? How quickly will we return to physical meetings and physical get-togethers, and how will they be a mix of both physical and the virtual space? So I think it's certainly put a turbocharge on the use of the technology in our everyday lives.
Andy's just come in with a question. What business model does the Cairns Self-Drive digital platform use, and is it subscriber funded?
We have a strategic alliance with a company called Outdooria that serves content through the existing app. So it isn't subscriber funded. They purchase other apps and it's embedded within it, but it allows us to track, monitor and communicate directly without relying on a single digital platform. But I think the Mayor wanted to also chime in there.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Mark. I just building off what you were saying before, that Cairns has been an area that really has, over the last 20 or so years, really reached out to the world, and I think we're probably far more advanced in many respects in terms of some of the communicating with our overseas markets in particular, but our diversification has been fairly good. I mean, it's we're not. I don't think we're overly exposed in any one area. I don't know. I take out of this the fact that that we should come out of COVID with a real new enthusiasm, and I mean it's a whole new world waiting out there, I'm sure, and for us I think that offers a lot.
I'm wondering, just following on from that and the points made about the reset that COVID's providing you, but you're also in that unique scenario, isn't it? That, and I look at the barrier reef, the bleaching, global warming, restoration, the tourism asset effectively is in decline at the moment. There's this pause with that COVID's impact. So I'm just wondering, does that start creating a bit of a reset in the tourism product? Will through the natural impacts on the barrier reef, is that going to reshape maybe some of the tourism opportunities more or less? And you're looking at local food and other things, which is rebranding. But you guys seem to have this double whammy up there. I'm just wondering, is that creating a bit of a reset on what might be the long-term tourism strategies for Cairns?
Whammy at the moment, Rob, and that's COVID. We haven't heard too much about bleaching and other issues of late and global warming, but I'm sure the rest of it's all going on as it was before. But maybe there will be a reset. There'll be a reset in a lot of ways, and it's quite remarkable, the conversations that I have these days with people, where when we talk about issues like global warming and the reef and whatever, we come at it from a different angle about, look, we really, this has probably been, in some respects, a great warning bell or something saying, look, look at me, I'm in pain, and maybe our attitude will change, you know, I think we feel we've got a great connect with the environment. It is just part and parcel of our life. Always has been. I mean, as a 5 or 6 year old boy, every weekend I'd be out on the reef with my family, and I was a part of that. These days, I think we don't have that same relationship with nature and with all that's beautiful in the world. And maybe, just maybe, this might be for us a great wake up and call to arms. And I certainly hope so.
Thanks, Bob. Time has raced away from us. We're out of time, which I'm sorry, but because it's been very interesting hearing what's going on in Cairns and the difficulties you face, but also some of the fantastic ways you're going about addressing these problems. And I'm quite encouraged to hear the enthusiasm in your voices for being at the starting gate when the opportunity arrives. I'll just give Mark and Bob each a minute to make a wrap-up comment if they'd like to. Mark.
No worries. I'll kick it off. Look, from our perspective, across Australia, the tourism industry will change fundamentally as a result of this. Global travellers will be much more discerning with where they go and what they do. Tourism is only one part of our economy, but I think if COVID has taught us anything, it's time to strengthen our bonds and our connections within the economy and take what is truly unique from our place to the world. It's no longer just a matter of price-driven purchasing. I think the customer on the other side will be much more discerning, and they will want to know a lot more about the impact that they have and the contribution that they make. So I think it has been a great reset for us. It's an amplification or a turbocharging of the path that Bob and I had already been on. But it certainly brought the rest of the economy very sharply into focus on the need to work together on issues like aviation, where it's really obvious that without that collective effort and collective impact, then we won't be able to achieve our goals.
Thanks, Mark and Bob.
It's an incredibly changing world. When we were we were being elected in the week that the social distancing started, and to think now that we're already this far into a term, but you know, this is the feelings now, the expectations, what we aspire to. It's all changed. We had 4 years of budgets pretty much worked out. It's now tip that upside down out of the basket, scramble around the floor, pick what you want, what you don't want, get yourself into a position that really will take us forward. And that's the great challenge of this council now, to set tropical North Queensland, Cairns, for the forward trip. And that's not looking at tomorrow, that's looking, as I say, long term. Now that's exciting in itself. We're confronted with a problem here. The opportunity is to address it, and to address it well, and to do it better than anybody else.
That's a very warm and positive way on which to finish our webinar this morning. So thank you very much, Mark and Mayor, for your participation. We will circulate a communique that captures the ideas in today's conversation, and also some of the comments in the chat box that we didn't get to. At the top of the chat box, there's 2 links. One is a link to Robert's diagram, and the other is the link to useful websites that SEGRA has put together. If you'd like to contact me directly, my email's kate@segra.com.au or robert@vitalplaces.com.au. On Friday, we'll be hearing from Michael Eels, who is the Australian representative of Business Model Inc. And the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur, Leanne Kemp, will be joining us as well. We'll be talking about the circular economy. So I look forward to speaking to you all again on Friday. But thank you very much for your participation today. Thank you.